So today I'll be talking about the power of having a speak up culture, having environments where employees' voice is welcome, and it's really good for business.
Wow.
What? Okay. Red light means we're on. And we're live. We're live. We're live. We're here.
We're here. We're live.
Live from our basements. Hello, LinkedIn universe. So good to have so many of you here. Hello, everyone. Steven Shadletsky here. Delighted to be with you again. Hello.
Hello.
It's Steven and Tobias. We're both delighted to be with you here today. Please hop into the chat. Let us know that you're here. Let us know where in the world you are joining us from. We'll be able to see your comments. Tobias, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Nice. I know it has been a busy few days for you, hopping from different workshops and stages and planes and whatnot. So I'm glad that we have you pinned down in one standing location. And really delighted to have this conversation with you, and delighted to see who will join us both live and on our recording. So hello, good morning from Mexico. Laura, thanks for joining us. So I came across you, I think it was a LinkedIn algorithm win. You are a co-founder of a company called Heart Management. You lead a podcast called Leading Transformational Change. And the first episode, I came across you because I was on a Megan Wrights kick. Megan Wrights is a great researcher, speaker, writer, really on speak up cultures, which we're both passionate about, and on employee activism. And so I think if I remember correctly, I first came across you and your podcast through listening to Megan Wrights. But you've had Dan Pink and Kim Scott, Radical Candor, and Ann Turnbull, and Ed Sheen, and like some really amazing people and thought leaders in culture on your show. And then we just sort of been like, hey, I care about this. Hey, you care about this. Let's chat. And though we're from different parts of the world, I see us as being on the same team, trying to advance more healthy cultures, as I know so many people who are joining us are on that team as well. You also have a book coming out, hopefully in October, same as mine. Mine's coming out on October 3rd. Yours should be as well, called The Culture Challenge. So welcome, and what's kicking? And then we'll say hi to everyone who's joined us here.
So thank you so much, Stephen, and I'm very excited that we're going to be able to have you on the podcast sometime soon. So that's going to be really, really, really exciting. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be in the company of greats when joining your podcast, your company, as well as all the illustrious, amazing guests you've had. So that's awesome.
I think I've been blown away, and I continue to be by just the generosity and the willingness of people to share their learnings, their expertise, their research, and it blows me away every day. I think that's incredible. And as you said, Megan, if you're listening, Megan, we love you and we love the work you do, and you're amazing, and you bring so much clarity on that subject to the world. So that's
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, if anyone has yet to check out Megan Wrights' work on employee activism, please do check that out. I'm sure Ali from the team can drop in her TED Talk or something. We have Laura here, Michelle in Canada. I'm also in Canada. I'm in Toronto, Michelle. So if you like, you can get more specific on where in this fine country you are. Hi, Bowman in Virginia. So good to see you here, Bowman. Danny in the UK, Abdullah in Saudi Arabia, and LinkedIn user in Newmarket. Feel free to let us know who you are, LinkedIn user, if you'd like, just because all we see is LinkedIn user. So Tobias, can you give us a sense of sort of your origin story? I know you've done, you've been leaders you've been a leader inside of an organization. And then I know you've done a lot of consulting and support work for, the one thing in common, as I like to say with all of my clients, I think the same as yours, is human beings work there. You've worked private sector, public sector, for-profit, not-for-profit. You know, and I like to think of my clients as psychographic as opposed to industry or demographic. You know, my clients, the ones that we do good work, they just think and behave in a certain way. So can you let us know sort of your story and your origin story and what's got you to, you know, writing this book, doing this podcast, doing the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think an important part of it is really connected to something that is maybe not the most positive aspect of my origin story, but I grew up in a Christian community that really turned into more of a religious cult, and my parents were active there. I grew up there. I even became a leader there, and in the midst of that environment, my mother, who was one of the leaders there, she suddenly was kind of pointed out as somebody who was a problem by the founder, and suddenly he was isolated and demonized, even to the point of trying to take her own life several times. And the questions of how an organization that we kind of had been excited about in terms of thinking that this was kind of a noble mission, how it could turn on into something so toxic, and how, looking back at it, thinking how I, who would even at that point have seen myself as a values driven and ethical leader, could become complicit in psychological abuse. And I think those questions have really driven me, and to have that sense of a call in that sense to kind of dedicate my professional life to advocate for healthy culture. So for me, it's very personal. It's not just something that comes out of a professional experience, but also from personal pain, personal trauma, and personal regrets, I should say as well, and just trying to understand how did I end up staying there? How did I end up becoming part of something that I look back at as being so incredibly wrong? And why? How come that so many other organizations, even though they're not cults, end up in similar things? And what is it that drives that? And I've had the opportunity to also work with several organizations that have gone through crisis and scandals. But professionally, I come more from the communications side, working with strategic communications and leading a strategic communications agency. But working within that, I felt like many of our clients, that they were trying to fix things through finding methods of communication. But what was really going on was that there was a lack of clarity of who they were, what they stood for, where they were going, which so all of these things kind of connected me into culture. And then coming in quite several years ago to an organization that was really going through a crisis of trust after a scandal, where the leadership was willing to do the hard work and doing one of the things that I think is so important, which I call leading with courageous humility, which is really admitting that we're vulnerable and owning our part as leaders, and then actually acknowledging the inconsistencies, actually apologizing to the people harmed, and through doing that, really we're able to rebuild trust and a much greater health. So I think those are some of the stories that kind of tie into to my origin story, to why I do what I do today, and why it's really become something that I've dedicated my professional life to.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know. You know, in knowing you and knowing your background, I knew that there were experiences in sort of tumultuous cultures and, you know, reconciling your part in it. I didn't know it was that specific background. So I appreciate you sharing that. And just a few sort of ideas that come up in hearing that. And there's so much synergy, I think, in both in our experiences and what we care about. I mean, one, trust isn't about perfection. Trust is about fallibility and being comfortable in admitting, like, we're human, you know, and when humans own the mistakes that they are a part of, whether it was with intent or not, we can actually build greater trust. And I think that's what you're speaking to, especially in the context of those leaders in that company and scandals. It's just like, own the impact, do better, move on, you know? It's just something that comes to mind there. I've seen organizations and leaders use purpose as a weapon, use purpose as abuse. It's why I believe that a friend of mine, Rich Davini, has taught me that while inspiration is the wind, trust is the boat. And if I were to pick one over the other, I'd pick trust, because you can have as much wind as you want, but if you don't have a boat, you're not going to go anywhere. Similarly, putting a snowmobile or a snow machine in sand, it'll work, but it's got to work really hard. It's gonna you're gonna need to repair parts, repair the entire thing, and that's a good metaphor analogy for toxic culture and toxic leadership behaviors. Is you might get results, but at the cost of what? And they're typically short term. And I mean, a few other. There's so much that comes to mind, but one, just acknowledging, that you took the high road. Like, it would have been easy for you to hide or play small or stay complicit in, but it got so deeply personal to you, and it was so dissonant between who you thought you were and who you wanted to be, and then who you had become or what had become, and you took the high road. And I give you, great kudos and great respect for choosing that. The analogy I make for culture is pickle brine. So I call it pickle theory. You can take a world-class cucumber, put it in some awful pickle brine, and you have an awful pickle that should never have been made, which I think is the case of you and your family. Like, you're good people, but put in a toxic brine, you get toxic behavior, even if it isn't your intent. Similarly, you can take a mediocre, even a not so great cucumber, put it in some excellent pickle brine, perfect pickle, great pickle. So the environment, the brine of our organization matters more than the cucumbers, than the people. We know this. So just a few sort of thoughts that spring to mind. And great to see Tim McClure here. The infamous LinkedIn user is Tim McClure. Great to see you here, Tim. But yeah, I mean, just anything to add on to those reactions to sort of your opening and origin story there.
I think there's so much, and I, like you, I think trust is so much at the heart of this. And I would like us to, like, when it comes to culture, to talk more about trust. And I think so many times we talk a lot about engagement, and engagement is important, but I think trust is in one sense more fundamental. And I've done some interviews with Sandra Sucher. Can really recommend her fantastic book, The Power of Trust. And she's a professor at Harvard, and she says that trust is making ourselves vulnerable to the actions of other, to the point of not just being disappointed, but even betrayed. And I think that shows a bit of the weight of leadership, in that sense, that when people are in that place, whether they have chosen us or not, chosen us as their leaders or not, they're in a place where they have to trust us, and which is it is a weight to bear. And I also think, in terms of reflecting on my own complicity, that from one perspective, I can give myself grace, understanding that, okay, I mean, I grew up in this environment. This was what I knew. This was what I had learned through years, and what I'd been socialized into. And it was a very closed environment in many ways. But then on the other hand, it's very important for me to also realize that I had agency. And I think that that's an important part as well. And that sometimes we have to live with both of those thoughts in our minds and hearts at the same time, that I should have, many years earlier than I did, walked out the door and never come back again. But I didn't, and I can understand why I didn't. But at the same time, I can't defend that I didn't. And I think that's part of, in that sense, dealing with regret, and dealing with something that we can say that this, I shouldn't have done this. I can understand why I did. But still, I think in the aspect of understanding that we have agency, it also helps us, I think, as we move forward, to better deal with whatever life throws at us next. Because I think something that I've become very aware of is that that I cannot just assume that I will speak up, that I will not engage in this wrong behavior or this culture, that I need to be very careful. And to be honest, I think every organization needs to be very careful. And one of the bones that I'm trying to pick basically is that I think that, and you talked about how purpose can become destructive in that sense. And I think the same is true about values, that so often values become like this shield that we use to protect ourselves against criticism. So we claim these values to show how amazing we are as leaders or as organizations. But I think, in a sense, we need to take an opposite approach and think that our values are there to help us have the robust conversations of the hard parts in that sense, and talk about where we're failing, where we are conflicting with those values, and invite the information that can point out our vulnerabilities, which of course connects to your work and so on speaking up. But yes, it's about speaking up, and yes, it's about creating that listening culture, but it's also about that assumption, or it's also about the fundamental belief to stop seeing and just assuming that we're good organization with great values, but instead understand that we are vulnerable. And I use the picture of an IT professional who, I mean, I think no IT professional would say that this is a 100% secure network. I mean, that would be stupidity. And the same is true about our leadership and our organization. Every leader in every organization will at points fail to live up to the values that we claim. What we do in those situations matters. How we respond to the people who raise concerns in those situations matters. And in every, whether it's been with a client who's gone through a scandal, or talking to whistleblowers or whatever, as we've been doing leadership programs and so on around some of these big corporate misconduct scandals, it's clear every time that there has been information available, but it hasn't been listened to. And a part of that I see over and over and over again is that the company or the organization tries to protect this image of themselves as being this great, whatever that was, talking to Volkswagen's former chief ethics officer who came in after the scandal there, and who said like, oh, but that the attitude was, we are the benchmark, why should we listen to someone else? And that's exactly the attitude that we have to get away from.
That's ego and blindness. And
yes.
I'm so eager to dig into the content of your book, but sort of the story I already make up about it, it's not called the culture perfection, it's called the culture challenge. And I've never really thought of this notion, Tobias, but I love this notion of sort of entering into our leadership and into our culture with a baseline understanding of, we're going to mess it up. Like there's gonna be a gap between what we say and do, or there's gonna be a gap between our intention and our impact. And as opposed to coming into our leadership and our organizations and culture with a belief that we can have perfection, that can be dangerous and blinding. We can use values as doctrine as opposed to values as guides, and values as pillars to dissect our behavior and results as a basis for discussion. Yeah. So in my book, Speak Up Culture, the sort of the main thesis is it's this everything can be solved with a 2x2 matrix. It's safety and impact. So hopefully we feel it is both safe and worth it to speak up. I'm hearing in your instance, in sort of growing up in this cult, you didn't necessarily feel safe, but the stakes became too high, that you needed to speak up, you needed to whistleblow, you needed to remove yourself and the others that you could, because it became too personal and too important. And I can appreciate you grappling with and moving through and dealing with that regret of feeling you could have done it sooner. We can't change the past. We can only help people change their present and future. Have you I know you interviewed Dan Pink, and I know his latest work is on regret. Did you dig into that with him?
Yeah, we actually did. He didn't do a lot of interviews where we talked so much about moral regret, because that was something that I really wanted to talk to him about. And I think, and I love something that he talks about in his book, which is a great book, by the way. And he talks about how so many people get tattoos saying no regrets, and many of them regret that later. It's like, that's beautiful. But I think we have this
That's
thing of,
why I have tattooed just regret over
yes,
my, yeah.
yes, it's probably but
More accurate.
yeah, it's more accurate, exactly. But I like, when I work with organizations, I try to get them to see that we can be great in so many ways but still broken in others.
Mm,
And so saying that there's something that is wrong, that is something that is unhealthy, doesn't say that everything is unhealthy. And we have to be able to live with that tension, and see truth as our friend, both in terms of what is good, what
mm,
we can build upon, and also in terms of what we can change. And I think in Dan's work, in our conversation, that of course he thinks that the idea of saying we have no regrets is basically it's stupidity in a sense. Because I mean, and I think the same as well, that I mean, I think all of us have done things that we regret in some way. But the question is, what do we do with it? And of course, he encourages us not to wallow in it, or not to try to act like it isn't there, but instead allow it to move us forward, and allow it to become something that propels us forward. And also, which I think is really interesting, that he says that regret helps us clarify our values,
mm.
and which I think is a powerful concept as well.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, something that I think is really interesting is to think about institutional regret, and how sometimes it can actually be important, even as organizations and as nations actually have times of remembrance, where we remember the way
Mm,
we failed, because it actually helps us remember what the stakes are, and it also helps us remember how vulnerable we are. And
yeah.
and I heard a great example of that. I think it's Maple Leaf Foods in Canada, which I'm sure you're aware of, and the listeria scandal, I guess it was, that they were part of, and where they still to this day have a day every year when they actually reflect on what happened, and then remember that, and remember the victims of it. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yep. And I remember when that scandal happened, and their CEO, I think it's Michael McCain. I
Yes,
could be
yes,
getting it. Yeah.
yeah,
So he immediately, it was either that day or the next day, press conference in tears. We have failed you, right? Like it was quintessential. This is how you respond to a scandal. Sure, there's regret. Sure, this shouldn't have happened, but it did. So to your point, I love truth is our friend,
yeah,
right? And if they denied or they swept under the rug, that's that's only going to bite you in the behind worse
yeah,
later, or sooner rather than later. I also love this notion with regret. To your point of regret can point out our values, and it's kind of it's playing the opposite game. Well, if not that, then what? So I think that enemy or that regret can point to who we are.
yeah,
And I know
yeah,
Germany as a country has done a lot, and there's a whole generation of people who learned of the atrocities of Nazi Germany so that it wouldn't happen again. And unfortunately, genocide continues to happen throughout the world since that time, but they've used it as a propeller to say not that, and this happened under our noses, or we were complicit to it.
yes,
A great comment here from Danny. We're thick full of culture metaphors here. On well-prepared land, any seeds can sprout. On terrible land, even the best won't flourish. Absolutely. And please keep the comments coming. And if you have any questions for us, especially for Tobias in this conversation, keep it coming. I had one idea that I want to run by you. It came to mind recently, where one of the, I'm extroverted, and some of the best leaders that I admire are introverted. And I admire them because typically, and this could quickly spill into overgeneralization, but typically introverts are less comfortable in the spotlight, whereas extroverts are more comfortable in the spotlight. Like, I enjoy getting up on a stage. Like, that's fun for me. And so I've thought of, when doing leadership training, to sort of say, hey, who in this room wants to be a leader? And whoever raises their hand, more often than not, they're likely extroverted, like the spotlight, do it for their ego, do it for the status benefits, socially or whatever it might be, and then put that group of people into narcissism training. And then the people who don't raise their hand, more likely to be introverted. And again, so many leaders that I admire are introverts because they experience or discover something and they go, someone needs to do something about this. And they go, shucks, I'm someone. And they step up, not because they want to, but they feel called to. Now, I'm very aware this is an overgeneralization, and I think these streams should intermingle because, we need the diversity of both of those styles. But it's just a crazy, ludicrous idea, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, because sometimes I speak up not because I'm speaking up to say something important. I might just like the spotlight or want to laugh or whatever it might be.
Great, and very, very interesting thought. And I don't know how much I could say about the kind of introvert extrovert aspect of it, but I do think that motivations or motives matter a lot. And I think that it is something that I think we need to put more of a spotlight on. That are we is the fundamental motivation to serve. And I love, I've done 2 interviews with Frank Blake, who was the former CEO of the Home Depot, and he led a really fantastic culture change there with 350,000 employees. And one of the things that he and it really came from the founders, and of course it's the idea of servant leadership, but it's really kind of putting the pyramid on its head, and basically saying that the CEO is not at the top of the organization, but at the bottom of the organization. And he told me that, of course, that's easy to say, but he said that through his leadership there, that he tried to work out, what does that actually mean in practice? What does that actually mean? And one of the things that he realized, that it meant that he needed to spend a lot of time realizing who the people at the top of the organization, which in his mind were the sales associates out in the stores, were what mattered to them, what they needed, and so on. And I think just that idea is incredibly powerful. And I think so many times we end up in situations where we have people who serve leaders instead of leaders who serve their people. And I think that's a challenge for all of us. And to be very personal, I mean, I continually have to check my motives, and I think that's an aspect of because I mean our company is called Heart Management, so this idea of the heart or the inner life is really important to us, and of course we think about it in an organizational perspective, that there's this kind of inner life of an organization that we need to protect, and which is to great extent its culture. But I think the same is true on an individual level. There's this personal inner life, and which is incredibly important as well. So I'm not so sure if it has to do with being introverts or extroverts, but I do think the motives are incredibly important, and that it is something that we should put a bigger spotlight on. Because I also think when we think about how we end up in this kind of unhealthy culture or type of behavior that we look at and think, I mean, how could that happen? I think one of the reasons is moral licensing, the idea that because we do something great over here, we can allow ourselves to do something bad over here. And I mean, I think we see it incredibly much in politics. So yes.
Yeah, and moral licensing is fascinating. This notion of, the most sort of pedantic example is, I've been good on my diet, I can have a piece of chocolate cake, or I got straight A's in high school, I can go sneak a cigarette in the garage. And then it increases in its magnitude, especially the more authority or influence you have. I feel like I cut you off a bit on moral licensing, but what more to add there?
No, no, totally, absolutely, and I think it's a powerful driver, and I mean I've sometimes seen in nonprofits that there, I mean you can sometimes find incredibly unhealthy cultures
Yeah.
in organizations that have these incredible missions, and yeah,
Again, I think that's linked to how purpose can become weaponized, where
yes,
we stand for such good, so we'll proliferate a toxic culture to advance that thing out in the world. And it's like, oh, and what I'm hearing, heart management, sure, you're a communications company, but I think we both agree, I'm assuming, or at least my experience of every single leadership development program that I've seen or participated in, either as a participant or a facilitator, every single one starts with a module on leading self-awareness. Like, we need to understand and work with our instrument before we can help, which then the work of leadership is helping others discover, fine tune, own their instrument, and then have them help others fine tune, own, understand their instrument. That's the work of leadership. But I love that it's heart management. I love that it is communications from the inside out. Because
and
if you communicate it but don't live it, there's the dissonance again.
And I should say that Heart Management actually isn't a communications agency. That's the earlier company, but of course communication is central. But we're very much focused on culture and values and leadership. And to your point, I think of course that is the starting point. And we did a leadership program for this multinational medtech company, and something and where we did it collaborated with a lot of researchers, and one of them was Anton Brunsell, who you mentioned before, and she's done this great work on how we overestimate or have hyper illusions about our ethicality. And I
Ethical
think it
fading.
was, yeah, and I think it was so powerful that we kind of started the whole program with the kind of getting people to understand that even though you have good intentions, you might end up in a place where you wouldn't at all think that you could, because there are so many different things that when you are under pressure, when you're kind of come into this ethical kind of tunnel vision.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, the quintessential example of that would be Wells Fargo, and there
Yeah.
were some towns that had more bank accounts than people.
Yeah.
Like, some people had 5 or 6 accounts because there was a broken system that incentivized new accounts even if people didn't need them.
Yeah.
So, and there's a good documentary on that. We are beginning to land this plane and come to our descent here and landing. So we have maybe about 10 or 15 more minutes. So if you do have questions or further comments, please keep them coming. A few, I'm so enjoying this conversation, Tobias. It's
Me
flying
too.
by. I hope others who are listening are having as much fun and connection and resonance as we are. The comment I made around extroversion, I think is for me hyperly sensitive in the North American context, where I feel and see that we put the loudest voice and extroverts on a pedestal. I think, especially in this part of the world, we live in a very extroverted society, which I don't think is doing us well. So that's part of the sort of aversion I have, and I think it's also we're whether the efficacy of my comment around the link between extroversion, introversion, and leadership. Maybe a study that I can inspire someone else to do, because I can't. But I think as well, there's for me, there's a broken definition of what it means to be a leader, right? And I think I love that you bring up sort of that Home Depot. Who is it that there's someone who reverses the pyramid and calls it it's the inverted pyramid, right? There's the hierarchical, there's flat, which can work for 3 friends in a garage, but as soon as you grow beyond that, flat doesn't really work. And then there's the inverted pyramid. My friend Rich Davini, who's a retired Navy SEAL, talks about dynamic subordination, which is viewing an organization or leadership and culture more like an amoeba or a flock of geese. meaning leadership is often contextual of who's closest to the issue. So first responder, I was first on scene, so I just did the best I could until I had backup, as well as who's most suitable to lead, regardless of their rank, regardless of their seniority. Right? You could be working on a project and there's an issue, and even though you're the most senior, someone who you just hired last week or who only has 3 years of experience it's their domain, and you do the work of leadership to lead from the back or side and prop them up to be that leading goose, and you have their back, which Rich calls dynamic subordination or alpha swapping. So that's something that came up. I'm curious your thoughts on that, or what comes to mind for you there.
No, and I think leadership is hard. It is really, really hard, and sometimes we like, we don't respect how hard it is. And I think, and when I, because in the book I talk about habits, I talk about kind of culture building leadership habits, and I would say about them that they might be simple in the sense that they're not necessarily complex, but they are hard because they challenge our comfort, and we can't just relegate them to someone else.
And we have to give away our control.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah, we do. And we have to do just talking about speaking up, for example. When somebody brings something up to you, when I have an employee bring things up to me, of course, naturally, I want to defend myself. Naturally, I want to tell every reason why this person is dead wrong.
Yeah.
But I have to stop myself and just think, what a courage it took this person to bring this up to me. And I think those are the things that are hard. And so I think we need to, in that sense, I agree with you. I think many times that the model of leadership in many ways is broken. We need to have a lot of respect for that leadership is hard, and there's a lot of pressure we put on our leaders. And I would say, working a bit with the public sector, especially, I would say in the public sector, because they're many times under-resourced and so on. But sometimes it's also focused on the wrong things, and focused on measuring things that don't matter, and not giving enough trust to people, just like that. I think that you alluded to.
Yeah, or following policy because that's the policy, without examining if the policy actually makes any sense.
Yep.
Yeah, bureaucracy. A couple of really great comments here. One again from Danny. The problem with inverting the pyramid is that the middle management are still in the same place. Interesting. The book I've written is very much targeted toward middle management, because they're the only population that has multi-directional influence. Middle managers can influence up. Middle managers can influence side to side to their peers, and they can most definitely influence with their direct reports and teams and those more junior to them. And so I think middle management is really where, though change in organizations, I think, works at its best, or at least less violent when it's evolving from the top down. But I think change lives or dies in the middle of, do your middle managers believe it, embody it, have the right tools to bring it to life? So it's a really interesting comment, Danny. Any additional thoughts or reactions to that?
No,
to those points, Tobias?
It's a fantastic comment, and I'm just thinking that still there's the difference, and of course, it's easy to paint this picture and be naive about it, but still, if we think about the approach, do we see the CEO and kind of the executive leadership team as being in the service of middle management and people out in the organization, or do we see it the other way around?
Nice.
Should kind of the middle managers carry water for their, or so I think that still shifts the perspective. And again, it's all of these things are simple to, or you can very easily be naive about, and kind of, but I do still think that even though we might not anytime get totally there, just changing that approach and asking ourselves, who are we in the service of, it makes a big difference.
And I had a conversation with a client this morning around them attempting to drive some change to have more rest and recovery for their people. And the leadership team is telling the people managers to support their people to have more rest and recovery. And my question for them is around, well, what are the first and foremost the leadership doing to embody, model, celebrate rest and recovery at the highest ranks? What are then those leaders doing to create the condition where their people managers can have rest and recovery? Because if it's just top down and do it, that's not sustainable. Yeah. I think I'm going to have to pull an Adam Grant and think again, because I'm really glad I tested this idea of extroversion, introversion out in the wild, because as it turns out, I think I'm wrong. But I do want to highlight Bowman's point here, which is really well said, as well as add a bit more nuance to, I think, the point I was attempting to make. So just a reminder, extroversion and introversion is about where the individual gets their energy, internally or externally. The work from Susan Cain on quiet here is great. It's not whether they are successful or not as leaders. Very good, Bowman. And yes, introverts, I've heard the analogy, wake up with 10 coins and spend those coins on their social interactions with others, whereas extroverts wake up in the morning with 0 coins and gain their coins or energy from social interactions with others. So it's where we get our energy from. The point is, I think those who want to lead for the social benefits, for status, to be in charge, to be noticed, to be seen, I think those are the leaders who are most likely to become narcissistic or toxic leaders. I think the greatest leaders are the ones, regardless of if they're extroverted or introverted, are the ones, as Tobias has really aptly brought to life here, are the ones who show up with a service orientation, with the intent to serve.
And talking about narcissistic leaders, Jennifer Chapman at Berkeley has done super interesting research on how narcissistic leaders, how they impact culture and how that impact stays for a long time, and how we so easily conflate narcissistic with visionary leadership, and how we need to find the difference there. And maybe that's in a sense more relevant than the extrovert introvert aspect. But of course, and I think many times we do want that visionary leadership. And of course, it's like in entrepreneurial organizations, you need people to really, I mean, who are ready to push things forward and so on. But still, it's very important to not conflate that with narcissism, and go for people who are a bit too much about themselves.
Yes.
But you can be visionary and be about others. So
yes. Oh, so interesting. So, and there is such a thing as narcissism in healthy levels. So if you look at narcissistic personality disorder,
totally.
So you look at the DSM-5, I think there's 9 different points. And if you say yes, or others say yes of you for 5 or more, you are disordered. But narcissism is the desire to be noticed, to be seen, to stand out. We all want that to a certain extent, but it's those who spill over and want that too much, or have a though the world revolves around all of us as individuals, because we're subjective, it's those who are disordinately feel that the world revolves around them and they can do no wrong. I think we should remove narcissistic and leader. It should be, narcissistic visionary or narcissistic boss. But seldom do I think anyone could be narcissistic or disordered and a true leader. Really interesting. And the interesting thing about narcissism or the disorder as well is oftentimes those who are disordered on narcissism are quite charming, are quite convincing, are quite influential. So it's really slippery, really slippery. A couple more great comments here. Danny says, I'll say middle people are the most influential, as you say. That's where the investment should focus. And IMO, I'm kidding, in my opinion, pyramidal views either way up, neglect that. Distributed leadership is one alternative, but it requires high trust. Thoughts or reactions to that, Tobias? What stands out for you there?
Oh, Danny, I mean, no, I actually, I don't really. I think I have too little understanding of the distributed leadership model. So I think I'll choose to pass on that. But
Fair.
I'm sure, Danny, that you have an important point here. So
Yeah,
I
I
just think,
agree.
yep.
Yeah, Danny, it sounds like you know what you mean, and it sounds like it's
Yes.
good. Feel free to add another comment to help us understand what you mean there. And Curtis from Oregon City, Oregon says, Adam Grant has a great perspective that we should strive to be a scientist, not a politician or prosecutor or priest. Scientists seek the truth and are excited to be wrong, as they are only getting closer to the truth. The others are only interested in their own version of the truth. Very well said, Curtis. Agreed.
Yeah.
Tobias, anything that we did not cover that you were hoping we would before we land this plane here together?
I'm not sure. I mean, to me, I guess one of the most important points that I've seen in my work is that so much. I mean, when we talk about culture, whether it's a speaking up culture or whatever aspect of culture we talk about, that the way that we approach culture and changing things about culture, and I like the idea of renovating culture, not necessarily kind of transforming it, but anyway, that we see it as a project or we see it as a short-term initiative and or an event. And I think, to me, one of the most fundamental shifts has been to realize that cultural health, or then again take the picture of the heart in that sense, that it's just like with our physical health. Physical health, we all know, it's not built by what we do occasionally, but it is built by our healthy habits. And the same is true about cultural health. And so when I work with organizations on this, I'm realizing more and more that it's the small adjustments in things that are done regularly that matter, not the big things that are done occasionally.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can understand that, the more we can start to apply that, the more we can actually see things happening in our organization. And in the book, I go through several of those habits that I think are instrumental if we are to build and sustain what I would call remarkably healthy and resilient culture, because that's of course also another aspect of it. And I mean, I'm guessing that our audience here, or participants are seeing the news, and of course it looks like we are in a lot of uncertainty. We were, and we are even more so over the last
That
few
is
days.
certain.
Yeah, and that's certain, exactly. And I think for that we need resilience, and resilience, I think, comes from being intentional about what we habitually do, so that we set the stage for example, when we talk about speaking up, which I think is such an important part of this. But again, it comes down to rituals. It comes down to our incentives. It comes down to the stories we tell, and it comes down to how we do it regularly. And no project or event is going to fix that.
Nice.
And so I think that's maybe perhaps what the last point to add.
Lovely. Good. I've heard this described as it is not intensity nor consistency. It is both intensity and consistency.
Yeah.
You know, if I this is a Simon Sinek story. If I go to the dentist 2 times a year, but I don't brush my teeth, if I just brush my teeth 2 times a day, morning and night, every day, maybe even a third after lunch, you know, I'm a keener, but I don't go to the dentist, I might miss something big. So it is both this balance of intensity and consistency. But I'd probably pick consistency over intensity.
Yeah. And
Intensity.
totally. And I would add, to that kind of intentionality in the sense of intensity.
Intensity.
That's
That's funny.
beautiful. I mean, the intentionality that even in terms of brushing our teeth, we can do it in an effective way. We can do it in an ineffective way. That's something I've recently learned.
With a 3.5-year-old, I'm sure.
No, with myself.
Oh,
We're
good.
just realizing, okay, I've been doing this wrong.
Yeah, and every now and then you should. Yeah, and you should replace the bristle every now and then too.
Exactly.
Very good.
So,
Very good.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to this, and for good reason. This was such a treat, Tobias, to have this conversation. It's so interesting and neat how I feel we're so aligned, coming from different worlds, different experiences, different parts of the world, and yet I find that we meet in the middle and make each other better and make our ideas better. And I hope you tuning in, whether on the recording or live with us, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you gained from this as well. Keep an eye out for the Culture Challenge from Tobias. Listen to his podcast, Leading Transformational Change, and I look forward to joining you on that one soon as well. Thank you again, sir, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all of you.
Wonderful. Take care, all. Keep brushing.